here today with Mark Sabourin, CCLB, who is Procurement and Logistics Manager with EFS Plastics Incorporated. Mark's role involves seeking raw materials for their Lethbridge and Listowel plants, ensuring a smooth delivery, and working with all their teams to get the job done. Originally from Montreal, Mark has called Southern Alberta home for the past 10 years. He takes great joy in watching his daughter's figure skating and Highland dance competitions. In his free time, you can find Mark cooking food from around the world, renovating his 1907 house, and drawing maps of fictional cities by hand. Thank you so much, Mark, again, for having the time today. My first question for you is about your work. I'm curious to know how you got started in your project and what was your inspiration.
Well, Olivia, it's good to meet you. Thanks very much for the opportunity. It's an interesting journey because 11 years ago, actually, I left my home in Quebec and I moved to Alberta to work like many in the oil and gas sector. So my function then was in logistics. I was a truck dispatcher at a large oil and gas fleet company, sending crude oil, fracking fluid, all the various commodities throughout Western Canada and the US. However, oil markets are what they are, and I took a different path in my career as the market softened, ended up working primarily in transportation. So my time in Alberta has been spent in the transportation sector. I worked as a freight broker and then as a transportation planner for a large hardware store called Princess Auto. I worked there for several years, and I'm very proud of being part of the R of repair, which is an important part of sustainability, is making things work again and really giving people the tools to make those jobs happen is a super accomplishment. I'm very proud of that chapter. The opportunity EFS opened up last year as their location in Lethbridge started in 2022. Actually, I joined the company pretty much from the ground up as EFS is a company with operations on the other side of the country in Listowel, Ontario, as well as Hazleton, Pennsylvania, US. But the Lethbridge operation is a new footprint. So I've been guiding the growth of the plant. Really, it's a really cool operation. Literally in Lethbridge, we are recycling an existing factory. It is the story of a company that is taking a location that was a French fry potato factory and making it into a plastics recycling plant right in the heart of the industrial zone on the north side of Lethbridge. So super proud of what we're doing in Alberta, and I'm happy to share more of my experience, but it's been a really cool turn.
Cool. That's so interesting to hear. Like, what a journey. Would you say that you had any particular inspiration for transitioning your career in that way, or were there more like external factors?
I would say that the external factor that pushed a lot of people to change was during COVID. And I actually live as close to Lethbridge as Calgary, and the commute was unsustainable. So I found a job where a large part of my role is remote. So I'm actually running operations for the plant in Alberta as well as Ontario from my desk. And I do travel to Lethbridge frequently, but it is interesting to say that I've taken advantage of my position now. The other thing is, of course, I've been very interested in sustainable, you know, a sustainable way of life and really a positive change for the future and really making the planet and our province more beautiful and better for my children's sake. So yeah, it's been a natural progression, I'd say, in my career and a very good move. And I feel at the start of my career in Alberta that there was some moral issues with the exploitation of resources, and I'd rather be part of restoring things, taking resources that already exist and making plastics from other plastics. It's an important step.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. My next question for you is about plastic. And in your perspective, what are some of the challenges with plastics?
Well, I think that I'm expected to work with a very complex mix of materials. So as procurement manager, I buy the scrap plastic from various sources across North America. And there are tens of thousands of consumer plastics in each product is literally a unique formulation. So we have to start with a mixed bag of whatever comes in the system, contaminants, dirt, as well as just the various additives. So literally the difference between two brands of margarine could be very different containers, even though it's the same fundamental pot, let's say. The idea is that I've got to be very careful and encourage manufacturing to be thoughtful in the design of products to make sure that they're not adding additives or components that are detrimental to recycling. Because as a recycler, recyclability is driven by a resin, a plastic material that I make from other plastics that I can then sell back to the market. So without that ability to make a resin that works, I cannot say it's recyclable. That's the thing. So there are products out there that unfortunately don't pass the test, and we have to be very careful to encourage industry to be thoughtful in their design.
Right. And you touched on that at the end there about encouraging industry. What would you say would be a helpful way to start to address that challenge?
Well, I think it's a twofold solution. One is, some understanding of design so that companies themselves respect things like reducing labeling and color and additives that may, lead to, darker resins, for instance, are often harder to process. So we prefer clear plastic over colored plastic where possible. At the same time, we want to see a future where that the normal practice is to put post-consumer products back into circulation. So having a content requirement in packaging would be a massive step forward, so that the bottle of Coke you bought today came from a previous bottle, and that story renews itself. And those are the two ideas that are the most important right now. And I think Canada's in a very good position in the world. We are somewhere between the US and Europe as far as our policy, but I think we are aligning with a future goal of, reducing plastic waste at all points.
Right. That's exciting. um, I think you've definitely gotten to this in your previous answers as well, but we're talking about recycling, and sometimes that's possible and sometimes it isn't. Big question, but what should we do with plastic that is already made, that already exists? So we can't reduce it because it's already there.
I think that there's a point where we have to say it's indispensable. When I look at, health science, especially, and certain areas where that, we have a better quality of life due to the plastic, we also have to be responsible for the life cycle of it. So you don't just make a plastic container without responsibility end to end. We need to make sure that businesses up and down the value chain are aware of this, and that they act with, a conscious and a very deliberate effort to do their part. This is where, if you are a source of pollution, you must be responsible for a way to change that from a waste item to a commodity. That is the way we have to consider it. And there are plastics at this point that have been lingering for a long time, and I think that things degrade. I think that we have to be careful with the action has to happen sooner. We cannot just wait for the problem to solve itself in 5 or 10 years. And by and large, I think that my role here in Western Canada, especially, is related to what happened in the past as well. For several years, Canada sold the majority of its scrap plastics to overseas markets, especially China. But we know that has changed a lot, and the dynamic is now to focus on our internal needs. So within Canada, within the US, are we able to process our own recycling at home? Don't push the problem to another country. That's very important.
Right, for sure. You're talking about degrading and material breaking down. What are your thoughts on microplastics?
Oh, I honestly, microplastics are a subject that I'm quite interested in. There were actually some speakers at the conference in Edmonton last week that were working with Nate on, actually getting some samples of what's happening in the North Saskatchewan River, which is a beautiful body of water. I treasure the water. I mean, I'm in southern Alberta, and I am a huge advocate for protecting the old man watershed, and I want to make sure that we keep what we have. We're in a crisis situation, especially in the south of the province, and to imagine that it could get worse if there was more pollution would be an absolute travesty. So I think as a business, we understand that getting plastics out of the environment into a usable space is critical. Within EFS, products are controlled, so we do not see material leaving our facility without, it is essentially filtered and carefully monitored. There is a washing step in plastic recycling, but we do not send that water back into the stream. We are processing it for purification internally before it's released into the municipal system for wastewater.
Right.
So I think there's certainly a risk that you can make the problem worse by trying to make it better, but it is something that I'm conscious of for sure.
Definitely. Yeah, it's crazy how prevalent it is already, and it's
Yeah,
just
and really it's turning into everywhere you look. The Tide Pod controversy in New York, the just the fact of laundry. I think that there's the validity in saying that your clothes, like let's take a polyester for instance, it's commonly made from recycled plastic bottles actually back into fabric. So the shirt you're wearing may contain fibers that were a soda bottle. Those fibers degrade in laundry. So is that a source of microplastics? And are we filtering our machines enough? Are municipalities requiring people to put a filter on their, um, you know, on their washing machine? Are manufacturers doing so voluntarily? Do we need to have some regulations there as well? So I think it's an effort for all parts to,
Mhm.
you know,
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting point because, we can get excited about recyclables, but sometimes, as you've mentioned, if it's recycled and into materials for clothing, and then that's facilitating like more microplastics in our waterways. So it's all so complicated.
and what's cool though is that there's novel technologies out there. I mean, polyester particularly has a lot of interest in new forms of recycling, especially where you can take the fabric and then recycle it again. So we need to make
Right.
sure that that is happening as well. That there's a lot of loss of material in the system, and we have to find ways that infrastructure exists that people are aware and are confident that when they put something into a recycling or donation bin that it gets reused properly. That's
Yeah, definitely. Um, in your perspective, what is the most important public message about plastic?
Well, I think we need to have the right plastic. I think that we have to look at the overall amount of plastic that is used in our daily life. And there are times when there's too much. I am not going to say that I want more plastic. I want the right plastic. I think we don't look at just the product on the shelf, but the whole life cycle of getting that product to the shelf. Was there plastic wrap on the pallet that brought it in the truck? Was there, how much plastic was used on the farm to make the food that we're eating that's wrapped in plastic and shipped in plastic? So how do we, at the end of the day, look at our overall footprint and ask ourselves, was it right to use that plastic? Can we make some sacrifices to save some plastic that is wasteful? I mean, I don't want to question modern life, but we are in a position where I'm buying blueberries from Peru and Chile, and in March and February, when I was a child, we'd only buy blueberries that were growing in July or August, and they were fresh, local fruit. And your grandmother would make preserves maybe from the blueberries, and it was that's how you would do so, and you take those jars and wash them and use them again. Now we have a clamshell package that traveled halfway around the world at virtually no cost, and we may benefit from that luxury, but it is worth asking ourselves if that is a way that we can support the planet if we all behave that way. And critically, even if the package is it recyclable locally? I mean, this is the thing I think where my job involves a huge scale. So I purchase material from all across the US and Canada, but there are places where the economics of transport don't make sense, especially remote areas and northern areas of Alberta can be very tricky to account for the cost of sending the material to southern to local markets, and there has to be scales of recycling as well. So maybe there are programs that work in your community. I think that that's another important step is to make sure that we are not just advocating for large scale solutions, but for local solutions and for reduction, for design change, but most of all for thoughtfulness about the right amount of plastic. And you know,
Definitely. Yeah, it takes a whole network of solutions working together with
yeah,
a
and
problem at this scale.
I think that it would be quite amazing if I could engineer myself out of a job one day. If there was no scrap, there will not be. I don't think it's possible, but it's a stretch goal. We could,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
I'm enthusiastic about this. I feel having my knowledge of the subject since I joined the sector has it's like drinking from a fire hose. The amount of specialized and unique aspects of plastic are remarkable. Like every
Mhm.
item is its own beast. You have to really look at it as a different challenge every day, but I view it as a joyful challenge. That's my motivation, and I think I seek to care for the earth. I seek to leave things better than I started out with, and I
Mhm.
hope that we are on an adventure together with many other interested folks, because the sustainability space is full of motivated people that want to make the world a better place. I think that's a very good place to be in this world.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great segue into our next question about being motivated and trying to change things. In our role as consumers, we often feel overwhelmed when trying to reduce our plastic use. Can you offer any suggestions?
Well, I would say, really, that's a good question, because
It's a big
I,
question.
I feel the same dismay sometimes, where I ask myself, okay, so we've banned the plastic bag at the shopping, uh, but the shopping bag is gone, but there's still a ton of plastic in my shopping cart that has not gone away. And just asking ourselves, where can we buy products in larger quantities? Because a bulk product will have less packaging per unit. So that's one thing where actually you're doing a favor if you buy one package of a kilo of fruit instead of buying 5 packages of 200 grams. You're actually saving net packaging overall. That's one thing I would suggest. I advocate strongly for bulk purchasing as well. Just that's a way to save packaging. If you're able to bring your own container off into a store, I think so. Go for it. I want to see more room for refillables in our consumer market. I want to see the tendency I saw recently develop in France, where they require grocery stores to have bulk refill areas, is critical. I think that's one thing that we have to do more of, and
Mhm.
we have to make sure that stores are aware of consumers' preferences for this. That people know that it's normal to bring your bottle to the store and refill it. That should be, reasonable step for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, no,
But
that's a great point.
yeah, that's it. I don't think that anybody's going to want to lose all convenience here, but there are certain items that there are better options out there. When you can buy a recycled plastic, do it. That's the best way to drive the business forward. So, I mean, I love this company called Ice River Springs. They make water bottles out of other bottles. They're actually called the Green Bottle Company, and they're a business that I support wholeheartedly, because they literally are putting these bottles out there, and it's all recycled plastic. So when you can buy recycled plastic, that's another thing. Look for that content. Look for it in your garbage bags. Look for it in your bottles whenever you can. For sure, buy it.
Right, it's that consumer demand for sure driving some of these things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, definitely. And I think that it's there's not going to be a perfect solution right away. I think we're all actors in an imperfect system, and you can only. I'm just looking at your background of all these bottles, and I'm just like, that this is all everybody's day-to-day life. Like, I go to the bottle depot every week or two, and I've got a nice, can full of these bottles, and we just consume. So unless we go back a few generations to when Coke was in a glass bottle, that's not going to go away unless we change entirely, do away with all the positives that come with this evolution. We have to now just be accountable for some of the challenges that we face now.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right, I have one final question for you. It's kind of a two-part question. So I'm curious to know, how do you want to move forward, and what is a challenge that you see in doing so?
I think that we want to see harmonization of global standards, and hopefully all countries can agree to, certain curbs, certain, regulatory changes to make plastics more recyclable, and encourage the right behavior by consumers by design change at the top. That's the biggest one for me, for sure.
hmm And do you see any challenges in that occurring, or
Yes, I do. I mean, I think that this is one that I feel is particularly pertinent for us as Albertans. Is we're in a time where we're going to see less demand for fuel for vehicles, for gasoline and diesel, especially as electrification and hydrogen systems take over transport. So there will be a lot more production of plastics from that same feedstock. So the natural gas and the oil that were used to produce fuels are likely to make more plastics. And especially, we need to make sure that we don't just keep generating new plastic, that we also are aware. I mean, as Albertans, we are proud of our massive producers of plastics, whether, in central and northern Alberta, especially. There's so many large companies producing kilotons of plastics, but we also have to have the same recycling ability. So if we are making kilotons of plastic, are we recycling kilotons of plastic? Are we the destination for recycling in North America as much as we're the destination for plastic manufacturing? Because to this day, new plastic is my competition. And as I've said, it's indispensable, but we have to be conscientious.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a great point. So those are all the questions I have for you today. But before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask if there was anything you wanted to add or any closing thoughts you'd like to share.
I think I've said a lot. I don't want to seem too, like a prophet or anything. I'm just a person. I'm just a man who has a job who buys scrap plastic for a living. It's interesting work. It is unique work, and I'm happy if you can, if this inspires somebody to, on their journey in sustainability. It's not a simple road. I think it's also a job where all of my skills really are harnessed. So I get to think about it as a logistics job. Basically, logistics is the art of getting stuff done. So I'm running. It is a business to this day. It's an interesting place to be.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you again for your time. This has been a really great conversation. And
Okay.
yeah, I really appreciate it.